Welcome to Table to Stage. I'm your host, Jordan Werma. So what you just heard was a small sample of today's guests, the Norwalk Gamer Symphony Orchestra. I'm a bit of a dummy, and I forgot to ask what this piece of music was called, but I think one of them mentioned it being from one of the games in the Legend of Zelda series. There are a few of those, though, so it doesn't really narrow it down. Bad job out of me this time around. But I did get the names of the gamer musicians that sidled on up to the mics and got themselves on the podcast. So we'll be hearing from Sam Newsom, Rachel DeMata, Nick Barra, and Mike Stark. Now, I don't ever pick a favorite among my guests, and this time was no exception. Okay, don't tell anyone. Mike is my favorite this time. He's a regular listener of the pod, so he's got that going for him. I sat and I watched them rehearse for a little over an hour before I got to speak with them, and a few things really stood out to me. First, it was surprisingly a very diverse group, and not because there were a lot of different ethnicities represented, which there were, but because the age range was staggering. There are some young kids, like pre-teens, and some that might have been even older than I am. I know it sounds impossible because that's so old, but the NGSO is really doing its part to bridge the divide between millennials and baby boomers, for sure. So navigating a conversation with so many voices on mic meant we had to stay pretty hyper-focused, so music and video games take up the lion's share of the conversation. It was really great to get a peek inside the passion that this community, not just the NGSO, but video game music fans in general, has for what I ignorantly called the video game music genre. And it was pointed out to me quite correctly that the styles of music used in video games is so varied that it really doesn't fall into a single genre. And I got to learn quite a bit about that. So if you enjoy the pod, leaving a rating or a 5-star review on iTunes is the second best way to make it easier for others to find and listen to. The best way is pretty old-fashioned. It's to tell someone about it personally. Word of mouth goes a long way. So go do that if you're so inclined. And if you're interested in some additional Table to Stage content, you can visit patreon.com/tabletostage, and you can find out how to get access to that. So for now, here are Sam, Rachel, Nick, and Mike from the Norwalk Gamer Symphony Orchestra, where I met them in South Norwalk. Let's start with just going around the table. This is the biggest group I've had on microphones before. So, Stan, you want to start, and we'll just go around?
Sure.
Start with your name and what you do with this ragtag group here.
Sure. My name is Sam Newsom. I play the oboe and the bassoon and some other instruments when the need is there. And I'm also the secretary of the Norwalk Gamer Symphony Orchestra, and I assist with organizational things.
All right, so you're busy.
Yeah.
Okay. Rachel, what about you?
I'm Rachel DeMata. I am first flute. I'm not multi-talented like many of these other people. I only play the flute for the orchestra, but I am our vice president and our social media manager.
Okay. All right, Nick.
I'm Nick Barra, first of all. Currently I'm sort of the main conductor. We have some guest conductors come up as well to take some of the load off of me because I don't consider myself to be a conductor, but I have the training to back it up, I guess. But my main instrument is piano. I've been studying piano my whole life. That's kind of my thing.
Okay. Mike, what about you?
So most of the time I'm playing guitar in the group, but certain pieces call for extra percussion, so you'll hear me playing the timpani on our keyboard. You'll hear me playing the cymbal on some of our songs. I've also tried my hand at arranging some songs, and I guest conduct one of the songs that I've arranged.
Okay. Another first for this recording session, we've got a crowd behind you guys. And these are other members of the orchestra, right?
Right.
You guys want to put your names out in public, or do you want to stay anonymous?
I'll put my name out there. My first name's Lexi.
Lexi.
Do you want me to speak?
No, that's all right. Lexi, who's next to you?
I'm Bobby.
Bobby and Josh. All right.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest crowd in table to stage history. All right. So and you guys can answer however you want, take them in whatever order you want. But I always like to start with a little bit of background, like where you guys are from, how you got into music, and in this case, video games. So where are you all from? Are you all from Norwalk, or do you come from elsewhere?
I'm
Sharing
originally.
microphones today.
Yeah. I'm originally. Well, I've lived around the United States. So I've lived in Phoenix, Arizona, also Southwest Texas, and Central Illinois.
Okay. How did you wind up here?
I got a job offer out here, and it was a part of the country I'd never been to before, and so I thought, I'll go check it out.
Okay. How long ago was that?
That was a little over 4 years ago.
All right. You're here to stay, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jeez, no, don't say you're leaving now. Oh my God.
All right. Who's next? Who's from? Who else is from somewhere?
I'm from somewhere.
Yeah.
Everyone's from somewhere.
So I grew up in the Ohio Valley. I lived in Texas for 10, 15 years, and then I moved out here.
Okay.
For
Job offer also.
Yep.
It's weird. People always say there's no jobs here.
Well, and the other thing
There
too
aren't
is,
because we
like,
took them all.
The other thing too is that so most people in our orchestra are from Norwalk or live in Norwalk, and I don't. I'm live in Waterbury.
Oh,
so
all right.
I'm probably one of the furthest travelers because that's
Yeah.
about an hour away, give or take.
Yeah. Okay. You drive or you take the train?
I drive.
Yeah. Okay. It's a nice drive up.
Yeah.
Route 8 probably.
Yep, Route
Yeah.
8.
Nick, where are you from?
I am also from Waterbury. I was born in Waterbury, raised very near to Waterbury, and currently live in Waterbury, Connecticut,
Okay.
the brass city.
Brass City. Yeah.
And I'm from Bel Air, Maryland. I went to school in upstate New York, and then just like Sam, got a job in Norwalk, decided, sure, I'll move over there and check it out. And that was almost 7.5 years ago. So
Okay.
still checking it out. We actually work at the same company.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you all get started in playing music? Was it when you were kids in school and they said, "Hey, you're going to be in the band," or was it something you went to on your own?
My introduction to music, when I was really young, my brothers were into like a lot of like heavy punk and metal music.
Okay.
And so they taught me how to engage in mosh pits when I was like 6, 7 years old.
All right.
So that was one of my like
Nice safe activity for
Yeah, you
first
know.
and second grader.
Yeah, well, you learn the etiquette, and mosh pits are very
Etiquette.
Yeah,
Wow.
He's not lying. He's not lying.
and,
actually.
mosh pits are very supportive generally.
Okay.
Unless you're at hardcore metal shows, most other genres of music, people help you back up, and it's
Not
real
my
nice.
experience in
Wow.
mosh pits, but
Wow.
Oh, you need better bands.
Well, so anyway, but also my mom was a music professional when I was growing up too, so she was a music teacher, and so I was just always surrounded by music.
all right.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Conversely, my parents knew nothing about music.
Okay.
So I was the one who started to be interested in music when I was in middle school. I wanted to learn to play the violin in 3rd grade, and my parents said no. So instead, they sent me to the school, and the school does like band auditions like every year, and so they take all the new, young, fresh-eyed children, and they're like, "Here, these are all the instruments you can play." And I just picked one arbitrarily and ended
Yeah.
up with the flute.
Okay. That's funny because I played violin in 3rd grade in Norwalk. Oddly enough.
The world is small.
It is, I guess. Nick, what about you?
So yeah, my dad was a musician. His whole life he's been a musician, plays piano, keyboards. He's played in millions of bands over the years touring around. And so I was raised to be a musician as well. I grew up listening to the Beatles and Yes and all those 60s and 70s rock, classic rock, progressive rock,
huh?
all that stuff. My whole life was just that. And when I was 6, my dad asked if I wanted to take piano lessons, and I started taking piano lessons when I was 6, and I haven't stopped. Well, when I graduated college, I don't take formal lessons anymore. I'm my own teacher, I guess, but I still play piano, haven't stopped since then, so it's sort of like my whole life is
Yeah.
music.
Wow, okay. Mike?
I played cello in 4th grade. I gave it up in 5th grade because practicing is hard when you're a kid. Practicing is hard when you're adult, too.
Yes, very
I picked up guitar when I was 17 and have been playing it on and off for the last 12 years. As far as music that I listen to a lot of Christian rock. When I was in high school, sort of branched out into rock, classic rock, modern rock, a lot of metal these days, and frankly, a lot of video game music. I'm now just like listening to video game soundtracks in the background most of the time. They make very good work music.
Okay. All right. So how did you all? All right. Let's back up. So
All right.
nobody comes to a video game music orchestra without already loving video games.
You'd be surprised.
I would be surprised.
actually.
Yes, I would. All right. So how did you all? What video games did you guys grow up with? How did that become a part of your lives?
Are we going to go around the circle?
No, you
the
can.
circle order again?
Whoever gets to the mic first.
I'm at the mic first.
Free for all here.
So I've been playing Nintendo games my entire life. I think the first game console I picked up was a Game Boy, and the first game I ever played was The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening.
Okay.
So I've been playing every Zelda game. I got really into the Metroid series. I like first-person shooters. I like adventure games, puzzle games. I like a whole lot of things, and I've spent probably some time playing almost every genre of game.
Okay.
Into the ground, everything.
All right.
I
What's
love
the
video games.
one game you've played more than?
Probably, to my regret, I've put the most hours into Dota 2. That is a game filled with salt and competitiveness, and
Pain and suffering.
it brings out the worst in me.
Okay. All right.
Similarly, I was also raised on Nintendo games. It's weird. My grandmother is who introduced me to the video games. It sort of skipped a generation. My parents want nothing to do with them, but my grandmother always, when I was growing up, would be playing Nintendo, like original NES. And from there, I just sort of played along with her, the original Zelda, original Mario Bros. 1 and 2, and varying other games from there. And to this day, the NES is sort of one of my favorite consoles to play on. It's just sort of nostalgia trip for me playing all those old games. But from there, I've pretty much been similarly a Nintendo fanboy, playing all the Zelda games, all the Mario games, blah, 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 all this stuff. My whole life, I've had most of the consoles and played on almost all of them except for Virtual Boy.
I was just going to ask you.
Yeah, no,
I
have not. But and from there, when I was in high school, I started to dabble in PC games and that sort of thing. Sort of went from there. But I would consider myself at my core to be a Nintendo gamer.
Okay. All right. 2 left. Who's going to take it first?
I
over the microphone.
Yeah. I too grew up with Nintendo stuff, and in particular, what I'll say, kind of related to our topic here, I played a lot of the old Mega Man games when I was younger, and those games have extremely melodic music. And so I was so inspired by it that when I was 8 years old, I was surfing the internet, searching for MIDI files of the Mega Man music to download and listen to, right? So that was my first brush with piracy.
Okay.
Anyways.
It begins.
I might have done the same thing with MIDI files when I was roughly 13, but it was for Final Fantasy music instead. But there's a photo of me in 1988, 2 years old, standing on a chair in front of our computer, trying to play the Jeopardy PC game. So if you really want to know my first experience with gaming, that would be it.
I spent a lot of hours on that Jeopardy PC game. I think even to this day, probably Tetris is the one that I've spent more hours on than anything else. But those old PC Tetris and Wheel of Fortune.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
Wheel of Fortune
we had that one too.
Like that, they had this whole series.
Yep.
And you just could waste hours just waiting for the same question again, so you would remember
So you know the answer and you could get a better score.
Of course.
So that was my first experience. Now, clearly, I was way too young to really remember that. But I inherited a Super Nintendo from my cousin when I was probably 7 or 8. And we literally had 3 games. We had Super Mario, we had King Arthur's World, and we had some basketball game that I never played.
Super Nintendo?
Yes.
That was probably one of the NBA Finals.
It probably was.
One of
or
many.
NCAA, maybe.
And when I was that young, my parents had a system because they didn't trust video games. And so what they did is that on Sunday, every week, you got 5 cards, and each card was good for 30 minutes of video game time.
Oh, this sounds like
wow.
what I do in my house.
And I had to ration them out during
we use poker chips. But
yeah, and I could turn them in however many. Like if I wanted to sit down for an hour, I could turn in 2. If I was misbehaving, they would take some away. And then I kind of skipped a couple generations until like the PlayStation. At the end of the PlayStation era, at the beginning of PlayStation 2 era, is when I personally like really started to get invested in games on my own.
All right, and what are all you guys playing these days?
Civ 5, still.
Still Civ 5?
Hey, I think it's better than Civ 6. I'm just saying.
It's incredible. That's probably the second game that I've spent the most amount of time in, is Civ 5, actually. These days, I'm playing Diablo 2. With some friends, but I'm also but I'm also playing Resident Evil 7. I do some streaming on Twitch, so I'm playing through that one. There's more than 7. Yeah. Don't get me started.
All right.
I recently got an NES Classic, the Mini.
Yeah.
And I hacked that to have. That was an aside, but you can't hear that if you're listening on the recording. To have every NES game, so I've been sort of having my way with that lately. But also, sort of a dark secret of mine. I didn't answer what my most played game of all time is RuneScape for PC.
What a nerd!
It's like a plague on my soul. I can't escape it. Every time I try, I can't get away. So I've been doing that too. Fell back into that old wagon or whatever.
Wow. So how did you all first get into video game music? What was your first awareness of like that the stuff that was playing in the background of a video game wasn't just throwaway background? It was actually music worth listening to. It's funny because you mentioned Mega Man, and that was one of the early ones for me. Legendary Wings was another one. I don't know if everybody played that one, but I remember the music for that one. And then the next time I remember anybody talking about music was when Final Fantasy was on like PS2, I think it was. So what was it for all of you that brought that into something you wanted to do?
Well, yeah, like I said, like with the Mega Man stuff, I go and seek out those MIDI files, right? Mm-hmm. And very quickly there became like an equivalence for me made between like the quality of that and the quality of other MIDI files. Mm-hmm. So I remember like searching the internet in 1998. I would find these MIDI files of like popular rock songs, like Blur's Song 2. Mm-hmm. And like my brothers would be like, oh, hey, that's a Blur song, right? And then all of a sudden there's this equivalence made, you know, kind of between that kind of music and the video game music, right? Also, the being like MIDI forms or electronic music, right? It sounds to an 8-year-old brain, right? It sounds very similar to like electronic dance music and stuff like that. And so I very quickly just kind of accepted it as like, oh yeah, this is totally, you know, good quality music to explore and investigate.
Okay. Anyone else?
For me, it was Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 1. Probably right around 1998 as well. I can remember trawling the internet for sheet music for Final Fantasy songs, and I didn't know anybody else.
You didn't find any at that time.
I did actually.
Really?
There's like 1 or 2 sites that are still around that were around back then that were amazing resources. They still are. Still regularly updated too. Like I don't know how they have withstood the test of time and not just completely disappeared. But
do you still have to have like Netscape on your computer?
No. They've modernized. They kept up.
Okay.
But I didn't know anybody else that really like played video game music, and so I would play by myself. Like I would find the easy pieces, even if they weren't for flute. Like if I could read the music, I would play it, and. Yeah, that it never really stopped. Like even after that, like even after I left high school and stuff like that, I would still occasionally, like whenever I felt like playing something or I thought I heard something really neat, I would try and go and find something so that I could play it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the first memory I have of like noticing video game music was probably when I was playing The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. For the Zelda fans in the room, you might be familiar with the Clocktown theme. Basically, the video game is centered around this town, which is called Clocktown, and there's this very wonderful flute or ocarina-based song that plays. And I remember my brother and I just sort of sitting in that city, just listening to that soundtrack over and over and over again. And from there, it branched out into finding music I liked in other games. I think maybe the other big turning point for me was when I discovered a band called Bit Brigade. Bit Brigade is a metal band that plays, metal covers of video game music as one of their members plays through the game on stage and project it back through it.
Okay.
So, like, Bit Brigade shows are Zelda or Mega Man or Castlevania, and this union of metal music and NES music was it was eye-opening. It's incredible, and honestly, they're a blast. We're not here to promote that band, but they're a blast. Go see them.
That's funny.
I can confirm. It's got to be RuneScape. I don't.
It's all back to RuneScape.
I'm sorry. I don't know. Like, because I grew up playing NES and Game Boy. I played the heck censored out of my original Game Boy Color, like, so they were falling apart. But I have a bad memory, so maybe that's part of it. I just don't really recall noticing the music. But until I started playing RuneScape when I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9, the music is just like so expansive. Like, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs in the game, and they're all made the composers. I'd like to meet them someday because they're really honestly amazing what they did with these like cheap General MIDI sound fonts. Like, they crafted their own sound font for the game, so if you hear a song from RuneScape, your first initial reaction, like the original old school RuneScape, your initial reaction is that this is like 90s General MIDI music, like Sam was referring to before, but it has this aesthetic that is so clear, and as soon as you hear any song, it's like, that's from RuneScape. And throughout styles, like every area, there's like jungle themes and desert themes, and all pulling from like Arabian scales, and so many different compositional techniques and methods, but they all have this same like unified sound to them. It's just amazing, and there's just so many songs. It's like mind-blowing, the achievement that they were able to do on this like stupid browser game in the early 2000s. Like, where did they find these guys? But yeah.
Okay. Now, I think I'm probably older than everybody else here. So my first introduction to, I guess, music, air quotes on video game music, Pong. The music was beep, beep. Like, it's just when the ball hit the paddle, it was a beep. So and so I've gone from that to the 8-bit stuff, and up to the 16-bit, 32, and now up to what's going on today, where you have full orchestrations, and just amazing compositions. So what's been your experience as gamers and musicians listening to the changes that have come along in all the music that's been part of the games? Has it changed the experience of the game? Has it changed your experience playing the music? Okay, everyone at once.
Yeah. I think people have and this goes for just video games in general, like, people have realized that there's money in it, like a lot of money in it, so everyone's kind of jumping on the train, and we're getting like John Williams level, like Star Wars levels of orchestration, and hiring these huge orchestras to do music for games, whereas back in the day it was like one guy like typing code into a whatever MS-DOS computer or whatever they used to use, and like little like saw sine waves or square waves would come out at the other end, and now we have like full like movie style scoring of these games. I think it's just gotten to the point where it's mainstream. It used to be more of a niche thing that not everyone really was involved in, but now like everyone, I mean, look at Pokemon Go, the explosion, like it was like a worldwide sensation. It's just like, it's become
Is there music for that
huge.
one?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not a Pokemon Go man.
I'm a Pokemon Go man. There's some remixes of like original Pokemon music in the app.
I know nothing about Pokemon games other than
It's got
the
good
cards
music.
that my kids play. So.
The cards don't have music though.
No, I've noticed that. I'll listen to that all day. So as far as like, because you mentioned film, so scoring for a video game and scoring for film, like, I know that when they're composing for a film, they're taking into account the story, how the music's supposed to be affecting the way people are watching the story unfold. It's supposed to really dramatically alter the mood of the person watching the movie. Is that similar in your experience with the music from the video games?
Yeah, I would say there's I'm going to say the most trite thing ever. There's similarities and there's differences. There's similarities in that, music in video games tries to get the player to feel a certain way, to get amped up for a heavy action sequence, to get emotional for some kind of cutscene and story development, to be pensive and inquisitive during puzzle solving. But there's a big difference in that, once a director has sort of put together a film, visually it's going to be the same every time someone watches that film.
Right.
So you can score the music exactly to what the audience is going to see. Whereas in a game, you have this interactive component where the designer doesn't really know exactly what the player is going to do. They can guess, and you can design your game to sort of say, like, the player is going to move through this area at this speed and stop at these points, but really you're guessing. And so your music can't be quite as precise, which almost takes a completely different talent. You need to be able to set that mood, with music that maybe loops or is able to loop, and then able to seamlessly transition into another piece when they finally do cross some threshold.
Right.
So it's a completely different approach to a very similar effect of setting mood.
Yeah, that looping, the ability to loop and repeat, and also be able to change into the next. Especially now with like open world, the massive games where you had like a 2D side scroller,
right? You can have this is the song for this level and
switch, but
so kind of to that point, there's this game Ori, and we actually played music from Ori last season, but Ori it's a Metroidvania game. It's kind of like a side scroller. You have to go back to areas you've been to before to be able to complete your goal. One of the really, really unique things about Ori is when you die, the music doesn't stop, right? So in a lot of games, when you die and the level resets and you go back to square one, everything kind of has to reset. The level resets, you reset, the music resets. But in Ori, the music doesn't stop. It flows through your failures and your successes.
Okay.
And it's such a little thing that at first you don't realize it. You don't have a conscious recognition that this is something that is happening until you've already made your way through the game. And then you're starting to think back about interesting things that you did or how many times you failed or things like that. And it's like, wait a second, that actually happened. Or it's not even like it's a eureka moment when you're playing a different game and the music stops and everything stops and takes you out of the moment of playing that game. But in Ori, with the music being able to continue even through your death or your failure, it keeps you invested in the game. It keeps you invested in that moment.
That's interesting. Is that music composed and scored to be that way, or is it actually computer generated to be continuous? Do you know?
It's probably a combination of both, because all of this music is designed on some way or some level to loop, because you don't know when somebody's going to finish a level or go on to the next place. But they also had to design it in a certain way that you don't have a definitive starting point.
Sure.
Because you're not resetting the music every time you die or whenever you reset the level, it still has to flow. It still has to be thought through so that when you do loop and when you do continue, it doesn't also seem jarring that it continued.
Right. Huh.
Yeah, and there are software that the composers will use that it's almost like blurring the lines between being a composer and a coder, that you have to sort of code in like where these crossfades and where the cuts will happen and when songs will flow into the next, when it will introduce like a new melody on top or whatever it's doing in that particular game. There's these softwares that the composers have to use to get it to be so clear and succinct and flowing through and unnoticeable. It's not like one song ends, a new song starts. It's just never ending, and it's sort of like a coding. I haven't delved too far into it, but I know it's relatively complicated to get that sort of thing to happen so seamlessly.
Oh, that, yeah. So, all right, stepping back just a minute. So, the Norwalk Gaming Symphony Orchestra, right? That's the full name of the group.
Gamer Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, that's a mistake I make almost on a daily basis.
Okay. All right. So, how did this group form? Like, how did somebody know there was going to be enough people interested in this kind of music that you could fill a symphony
We
with
didn't
this?
know. Well, okay, so we sort of knew. So our founding conductor was a guy named Brian Doyle, and he was, before he moved to Norwalk himself for a job opportunity, he was
Norwalk's
the...
just flush full of jobs. Holy cow.
Yeah.
At our company again.
Yeah. Before he did that, he was a student at the University of Maryland, and while there, he was the conductor for the Maryland Gamer Symphony Orchestra, which is a group of musicians 120 strong.
Wow.
That plays video game soundtracks, right? And they do all of their arrangements in-house, so it's students at the University of Maryland who are making all these arrangements of pieces.
Okay.
And so he came to our company. He was a new guy at the office, and I kind of approached him one day, and we were just kind of like, hey, what are you into, right? And he's like, oh, I did this music thing in college. And I was like, that sounds awesome. I bet I was thinking there have to be enough nerds around the area to fill up an orchestra and do that here.
So we work in a software company, and all three of us were software engineers. So I think that maybe led a little bit to the there's enough nerds here. All of us play video games, and I'm sure of all the people here that play video games, some of us must play musical instruments, and of that there must be some people who want to play video game music on their instruments. And
how long ago was this that the group came together?
We were founded in January of 2016, so just about 3 years ago.
Yeah. All right. Now, why video game music? Why are you doing Super Mario Brothers, The Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy instead of Bach or Mozart or Beethoven?
Well, because they won't let me play guitar for Bach or Mozart or Beethoven.
You could play lute. That's an option.
But what is it about the video game music specifically that draws you to that genre as opposed to more traditional symphonic pieces?
I mean, for me, I have a personal connection to it, or at least a more personal connection to it. I grew up playing video games. I mean, no disrespect to the great composers of our time, but I didn't grow up listening to Bach or Mozart. And playing guitar, I definitely didn't grow up playing those pieces. But I grew up playing Zelda and Mario and Metroid and Final Fantasy. So, and as I became older and became more of a fan of the music in those games, it's fun to play the music to the thing that you spent 10, 20, 30, 50 hours in, one game to play that piece, to be able to play that piece. And not only that, to be able to play that piece with a whole orchestra around you or a whole symphony around you it's incredible. It's really cool.
Coming from someone who did grow up playing and listening to Bach and Beethoven and Mozart, being raised a classical pianist and all that, or trained as one at least, it's a completely different vibe. I do, even to this day, I still perform in orchestras and all that good stuff. And it's just a completely different vibe. I'll be the first one to tell you that classical musicians are stuffy and there's all these archaic rules and etiquettes that you have to obey, and it's so not groovy, man, It's and this is just the chilled out. I love video game music. I love just coming in, sitting down, playing some tunes or conducting some tunes. The audiences we get are way into it too. You hear you don't hear whoops at a Mozart performance.
If you do, they're from me.
Yeah, or me.
And
but
you're probably being escorted out.
Yeah, exactly. And you go to these one of my strongest memories can't be that strong because I think it was at the Wall Street Theater. We announced that we were about to play Hikari, and there was an audible scream of excitement in the audience, and I was like, yeah, this is what it's about.
Yeah,
that we're making these people so happy to be coming to our shows and hear this music. I hope they play Hikari. I hope they play Hikari. It's my favorite song. And finally, we announced that we're doing it, and they're so happy.
Oh, wow.
I'll also say that at least some of our members are members in the Gamer Symphony Orchestra, but also members in their local community orchestra as well, playing all those sort of more traditional songs. So, it's not necessarily a one or the other. You either like this or you like that. It's just
Wait, people can like more than one thing?
It's 2018.
What the heck?
People are allowed to do that.
All right.
I mean, a little to that point. So we actually have somebody who is in our orchestra that doesn't really play video games at all.
Okay.
They just like to play the music, and we happen to have a need, and they were like, "Oh, this sounds like a cool thing to do," and then they show up and they play music with us.
Yeah.
So a little to answer your question, I guess from my own perspective, not necessarily from the orchestra's perspective, is that at least for me, classical music, like proper classical music, is not approachable. It's hard for me to understand. I'm not a classically trained musician. I did music in high school and in grade school. I never took it in college. I know very, very little music theory. I don't know what makes Bach and Mozart and all of them so amazing.
Neither does anybody.
Sam knows. Sam knows.
Sam, I'm with Sam on this one.
Bach is amazing.
I'll tell you. I'll be the first one to tell
You
you.
have to get the mic back from her.
I'm not saying that they're not. I'm saying that I don't understand what makes them so amazing.
That's okay.
But at least with video game music, I find it approachable. I have that emotional connection to it.
Another first for the show. We're having an audience member stand up and walk out.
And it's definitely because he's upset and not because it's just he has to go.
Because I insulted Bach. He's offended on behalf of Sam. But so for a couple years, more than a couple years, probably like 10 years now, there have been different professional organizations that have played video games music. Probably one of the most well-known, is Video Games Live. They have a full orchestra, they have a full choir, it's more of a show than just like going to the symphony and watching proper classical music. Sure. They do video, they do games, they have little cosplay contests for the people that show up. And I've gone to see them a couple of times with my husband, like 3 or 4 different times. And the most recent time I went to one, we're having a good time, we're watching them, and I just kind of start crying, like in the middle of watching them perform. And my husband looks at me, he's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, I'm fine. He's like, "No, seriously, are you okay?" I'm like, "I just want to do that." And he's like, he didn't know what to do. He just kind of like looked at me, he's like, "It's okay." Because I can remember what it was like to perform, and having that emotional connection to the music that they were performing had that profound effect on me.
Sure.
So when I found out that there was these people in Norwalk that wanted to play video game music, I'm like, sign me up. I'm here. Like,
That's awesome.
you know, as long as you guys are here, I'll be here.
Great. Sam, you can defend yourself now if you want. Take that microphone.
Well, I think Bach's reputation speaks for itself. We can go into that another time. That's not the subject of this. That's not the subject of this engagement.
All right. So, are there any composers that are particularly prominent in video games? Or there
Koji Kondo.
Nobuo Uematsu.
Nobuo Uematsu is the other pillar of video game music. So Koji Kondo, best known for kind of niche video games like Mario and Zelda. You may have heard of them. And Nobuo Uematsu.
Those are small
games. Small games. And Nobuo Uematsu is the lead composer for Final Fantasy.
He was.
He was
Narrow
audience.
Yeah. He composed all the Final Fantasy game music from the first installment through the 10th, I believe.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, lots of music in those games. All of those games are big, long games with dense soundtracks, and he composed them all, and they all have, an incredibly good sound. They're all unique. They all sound like, different games, but they're all incredible.
Wow. Now, when you do your concerts, I know you said you've had screams for certain songs, but is there anything that everybody expects you to play and is disappointed when you don't, or something that is just really popular among the people that come out to watch?
I think generally, I don't know if people would be disappointed, but we try and have, at least 1 or 2 really well-known games or songs from those games in our set lists, like Mario, Zelda, the big titles, Final Fantasy, that sort of thing. Just to even if someone off the street is walking to our concert, they'll probably know the Mario Bros. Theme more likely than not.
It's actually incredible how well known the original Mario themes are.
I mean, that sort of establishes exactly what you are.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's going to recognize that.
And this is the first time we're doing those themes, is this sort of run of concerts. So we finally made it, everyone. We're finally legit. We're finally doing Mario.
Other than like Mario and Zelda and Final Fantasy, is there a certain piece of music that really hardcore fans of the genre really, really love? Or do you?
Well, the thing is that if the genre is video game music,
Yeah.
it's so big a genre because there's, classical and orchestral video game music. There's metal video game music. There's everything.
Yeah, so there's a composer named Michael Giacchino who is very famous for being a film composer today. He composed the music for Disney's Incredibles, I think, as well as for the Star Wars movie Rogue One.
Oh, okay.
He composed, he's a very famous film composer today. He's also been a video game composer, right? He composed music for a World War II game. I forget which one.
Medal of Honor.
I think it was a Medal of Honor game, but I don't remember. But he composed some music for that. And so you have guys who kind of cross over between these different genres. And yeah, I mean, it's, as Mike was saying, just a huge variety of stuff.
Yeah.
And from the people who are just really into Ken's theme from Street Fighter 2, and then or Guile's theme,
Guile,
or,
Oh, Guile's theme.
right? Like Guile's theme goes with everything. But anyway, but you have I don't know. There's just an incredible variety of stuff.
I would say more than a particular song that someone wants to hear from a certain genre. I think if I were an audience member going to a concert like this, I'd want to hear something from a game that I've played. Yeah. So it's less about individual songs and more about I want to hear a song from Metroid Prime because man, I sure like that game.
It's almost like when you're like down at the club or whatever, and like your favorite song comes on. It's like, yeah, I love this track. And then like a song from Zelda comes on. And it's like, yeah, I love Zelda. It's my
they played Zelda at the club.
game.
I'd be at the club.
Yeah. Like Guile's theme comes on down at the bar.
It goes with everything.
I can't imagine. So, I mean, you're as part of an orchestra. I mean, you're not playing with MIDI keyboards and stuff like that, right?
Until we are playing with MIDI keyboards.
Do you actually use MIDI?
At times, but
Yeah, so we have a very eclectic instrumentation in our group, and we're very happy about that. So, for example...
You might call it ragtag.
So, for example, one of our players today plays an electric woodwind as his primary instrument.
I saw that. I
Yeah.
was confused.
So he patches in MIDI patches and plays it through, he articulates it as if it's
controller.
Yeah. So we have that. We've also used some other electronic instruments in the past. Another one of our players has an electric woodwind, and we have some keyboards in back that we've piped in some electric sounds before.
And before I was conductor, I also played synthesizer and that sort of thing, piano sometimes. But we have a pianist now, but I would also cover other parts on like an analog synthesizer. So.
Yeah, and we're happy to have that, and we're planning on experimenting more with those textures in addition to the more organic orchestral textures in the future.
Well, how much of what you're doing is trying to recreate the music from the game, and how much of it is trying to bring a more symphonic sound to something that was originally some chiptune stuff?
It really depends on the arrangement.
Yeah.
So, when I'm trying to arrange music, which I must stress I'm very amateur at, I've done now 2 and I'm working on a 3rd, I'm trying to do more sort of direct recreations because I'm a big fan of the original form. But for some of our other arrangements, we're either seamlessly kind of bringing together different pieces or saying, this was originally a 16-second loop and we're not going to play for 16 seconds. We're going to play for 2 minutes. So let's try and do variations. Let's bring in different instruments. Let's do it in different styles.
So you're occasionally even adding to the original composition in that case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best example of that in our current repertoire is this piece we're doing from Pokemon Red and Blue.
Oh, man.
It's an incredible amalgam, an incredible medley of themes and motives from that game, but there's a lot of embellishment, I would say.
Our arrangers.
So your Pokemon music is evolving.
Yes.
It's going somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it varies. Almost, or a huge majority of the pieces we play are medleys. They're arrangements of several themes, sort of like melded together. Whereas some of them, I tend, like I've made, one arrangement for this group so far from Earthbound we're performing right now called Smiles and Tears. And I think for the future, all the plans I have are not medleys. I'm kind of trying to stay away from the like overly saturated market of medleys and just picking a song that is solid enough to fill out and be its own sort of piece standing on its own. Like the Earthbound piece, I'm sort of taking from the original instrumentation, which was like SNES era, like sample, like PCM sampled stuff, and turning it into sort of like a wind band style, like early 20th century Americana sort of, you know, Philip Sousa, that sort of thing. I'm taking sort of like seeing it through the eyes of a classical composer. So I'm sort of taking those two worlds and putting them together.
Okay. As far as like when you're doing the arrangements of other stuff, are you trying to keep it recognizable enough for the audience that they'll be along for the journey, or are you trying to kind of surprise them with an arrangement that maybe they don't even recognize the song until you're, 30 seconds or even a minute into the piece?
I think on the whole it's going to be recognizable, but just different. But it's still going to be that melody from that song that you know. It might just have some other different things underneath it happening.
Okay. I mean, going back to our example of Pokemon, which, I mean, everyone's a huge fan of that arrangement because it's super cool, but that starts unrecognizable. The first probably 15 measures, you'd be very hard-pressed to, play 15 measures and then poll the audience, what game is this from? No one would know. And it's just arranged very well in that, after 20 or 30 measures, all of a sudden something clicks and you're into a more recognizable medley. So it's both surprising, but then after that, very recognizable.
Do you get a reaction from the
I don't know. We haven't performed this yet.
Oh, you haven't done this one yet?
Yeah.
Okay. How many concerts have you performed, and where have you performed them?
We've done 6 concerts so far as a group in our almost 3 years together. We've done concerts in this very room twice at the South Norwalk Library. We've performed also at the Ridgefield, Connecticut Library.
Okay.
We've performed at the Wall Street Theater, where we're performing again very soon. And then we've performed at the Workspace Academy in Bethel, Connecticut.
Okay.
And we performed on the town green at the Westport Maker Fair.
Oh boy.
That was
an experience.
That was an experience.
Yeah. So for people who enjoy symphonic music, they like to go to orchestras, but it would never occur to them that video game music might be something they would enjoy. Is there a starting point that you recommend for people who are interested in understanding what it is you do?
In the past, my starting point had always been kind of to introduce people to Nobuo Uematsu's music, because a lot of his music is, I think, but this was way back, before you had orchestras and stuff playing for video games. I guess the thing was, I have some family members, right, who consider themselves very cultured, right, but they are totally not into video game music. And one of my uncles just told me one time, wait, you play video game music? Isn't that just bad? and it's the kind of thing you have to kind of, if you want to introduce somebody to it, you have to show them a genre, or I like to try and show them a genre that approximates something they're into. And as we talked about, there's a ridiculous variety of video game music. Oh, so one thing I can say, Nobuo Uematsu in Final Fantasy VI actually wrote an opera in the middle of the game.
Oh, it's like a completely separate piece written as a scene in the game or something?
So there's a scene.
That is a fun part of that game.
Yes, there's a scene in the game that is an opera, right? And so, just to give you kind of an idea of why I would use him.
He wrote a full opera for this?
I mean, it's only how many
10
minutes long?
Maybe?
It's only 10 minutes long.
Excerpts. That's not inconsequential.
Yeah.
Well, and then he wrote a 20-minute long final boss theme for that game too.
The final boss theme to Final Fantasy VI is legendary.
Yeah, but so he's kind of a guy who I think is a good bridge for people maybe who weren't into, or who are into classical music, but just wouldn't even consider video game music valid.
Yeah. I think something a lot of people don't realize or discount that I would recommend to a classical musician wondering what's the big deal are old NES games, because a lot of these if not an actual Bach song being used in the game, which I've heard a few times, like they just take like a 2-part invention or whatever they want to throw in. They're very Baroque in their nature and their way of being arranged and the style of cadences and things they use, and that sort of comes down to the technology they had at the time. Like on the NES, you had 3 voices that you could have outside of white noise, 3 like pitched voices happening at the same time. And I feel like through the eyes of a composer, of a video game engineer at the time, they were faced with this problem of like, well, I can't do like huge chords. What style is possible to be done with 3 simultaneous voices? And Baroque music is very exclusively composed using lines, like individual monophonic lines stacked on top of each other, polyphony, that sort of thing. And so I think they just sort of went to that style, and that's sort of something that draws me towards NES music in general. I love Baroque style music, and there's so many parallels in like Castlevania. Like all the classic themes from Castlevania 1 and 2 are very Baroque in their nature. A lot of harmonic minor and a lot of all that motion. I don't know. I'm blanking on all the fancy terminology right now, but yeah.
Yeah, Castlevania 2 was one of those games that really stood out for me when I was a kid, as far as like the music was interesting. It was very different from everything else that I've had experienced. All right, so before we kind of wrap this whole thing up, what's the age range? How do you get involved? Who's able to come and join this if you're looking for people?
So we have an ethos that basically says, if you're willing to put in some time outside of rehearsal, we'll take you.
Okay.
As long as you put in the good faith effort to practice, as long as you show up, as long as you're respectful.
You have an audition or anything first?
We don't. We actually try very hard to not have auditions because we want the music to be approachable.
Okay.
We really want to be known as a community organization. If somebody's interested in music, regardless of their age. I mean, we have some people who are 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
We have an oboe player and a clarinet player who are both very young.
And a cellist.
And
a cellist. Yep.
Okay.
Oh, and a violinist, yeah.
So we do have quite a few people who are young.
Mm-hmm.
And, other orchestras, other symphony orchestras, even some other community orchestras may not be accessible to them because they do have that audition process that they wouldn't be able to pass, basically. And so we do try to make an effort to work with them. It's not like we just hand them the music and say, here, play, because we understand that they are younger. They're not going to be able to play some of this music. So we modify. I mean, that's one of the great things about having people in our group that, arrange these pieces. We can change them on the fly. We can write new parts. We can fill in certain voices on other instruments if we need to. So we do try very hard to be all-inclusive.
Yeah, that's great.
And like I said, as long as you're respectful, if you show up and you try. Now, it's kind of a different story, like if you show up and you're late to every rehearsal or you're not practicing at home or something like that. But by and large, I don't think we've really had any problems like that at all. So
that's good. So where can people find out more information? You have a website, you have a Facebook account?
Yep, so we have a website, norwalkgso.org. We also have a Facebook, Norwalk GSO. That's really the only 2 places that we're at because we don't, since we're not a large organization in and of ourselves, we don't have a lot of people who can always be on Twitter or on Instagram or, and like I said, we try to do 2 to 3 rehearsals a month. We understand that not everybody lives in Norwalk, so you might be coming from further away and can't always come. So we try to make the most of the time that we do have. So we're not always, taking pictures and stuff like that. So any kind of social media like Instagram, it wouldn't get used very much. So we do really keep everything to Facebook and our website, like our schedule, our hey, I want to join, where can I sign up, like all that stuff is going to be on our website. Okay,
great. Now, in the interest of time, because I know that the library would like to close, I'd just like to jump right to, I'd like to get a recommendation from everybody at the end. Something that you have found recently that has gotten your attention, inspired you somehow? It could be anything: a restaurant you ate at, a book you read, music you heard. Could be anything. Just something that you think other people would enjoy.
I feel like I already gave it, but Bit Brigade.
Okay.
Go check out live metal music and video games. It's a union made in heaven. It's great.
Okay. Anyone else?
So I'm one of those kind of strange people that, so little backstory, my husband likes watching speedrunners, right?
Okay.
He likes watching speedruns. I can't stand watching speedruns. I don't have the patience for it. Like, I don't find it interesting. I know, Sam. You're a 4-minute run. But I don't find it interesting to watch somebody do something repeatedly over and over and over and over and over and over just to try and get the next best time.
Right.
Like, that's not interesting to me. What's interesting to me is the explanation of how they do the things that they do, or why they do the things that they do, or different or unique mechanics that people will do to creatively complete levels of a certain game.
Sure.
And I know you asked for a recommendation, and now I'm completely blanking on this YouTuber's name.
Gerard the completionist. That's a guy.
Is it really?
Yeah.
You know what I'll do? I'll go home, I'll find it, and I'll send it to you, and you can stick it in whatever show notes you have, because I'm not going to remember his name at this point.
Something on YouTube. Go watch YouTube.
It is.
I
But it is.
YouTube.
There's one or two people that I regularly watch who are really good at explaining the why and I'm a programmer. I like the computer side. I like the architecture side, and they're really good at explaining this is how the Super Nintendo works, and because this is how the Super Nintendo works, you can do these certain things that allow you to skip time or skip certain levels or do things like that. So when I figure out what their names are, I will tell you, and you can stick them.
I have a recommendation, and then I have an inverse recommendation.
Oh boy.
Well, on the topic of YouTube, I'm like, since day one of YouTube, I'm like, it's like my thing. I don't watch television. I don't watch movies. I watch YouTube. That's it. That's all I watch, and Twitch now, I guess. But specifically, this YouTuber came on the scene about 2 years ago now. He's called Look Mum No Computer. Mum as in like mom, but he's British. He's like a Londoner. He is like this crazy, like I'd usually describe him as like a mad scientist, but for like synthesizers and audio kind of stuff. And the things he does, he made a Furby organ made of like 100 Furbies. And it's just an organ that plays Furbies. He's so... he's ragtag. He is so. He just like is in this garage, and with all his technical stuff, and like he's got paint all over him, and he's like he has an earring, but it's a safety pin. He's just one of these guys, like these punk rock guys that like are smarter than any scientist and do much more creative things than the scientist. But the things he does are just like so impressive and so intriguing. Just it's just like makes my creative juices start to flow whenever I watch him. Just inspiring. And the inverse recommendation is don't play RuneScape. It will steal your life. It will steal your life.
All right. I want to make a recommendation of a YouTube channel. We kind of got into this vein, but very related to what we do in our group. There's this
I know what you're going to recommend.
Yeah, I know. You guys know. I'm a huge fan of this YouTuber whose channel is 8-Bit Music Theory.
Okay.
And he does
very on brand.
Yeah, he does an amazing job of dissecting video game music from all different genres and all different periods, and it's really interesting watching him tear these pieces apart. And yeah,
I'll second the recommendation. They're very well done videos.
So I went and I looked. The guy's name is Panin Koek 2012.
Of course.
And if you can't figure out how to spell it, just search YouTube for Super Mario 64. Watch for Rolling Rocks. 0.5x A presses.
Oh, it's that guy?
It's that guy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that English?
It's that guy.
Wow.
It's
okay.
so basically the premise of that whole video is where this guy completes a level of Super Mario 64 by halfway pushing a button
And not releasing
and
it.
not releasing it. It's half a button press, and he completes the whole level that way.
Oh, my brain just broke. I don't understand that at all.
Well, go look it up and watch it. It's commentated, and he tells you how it's done.
All right.
What a good recommendation.
Right?
All right. So that's it. How you guys feeling right now? Good.
Excited.
Yeah?
Great.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys taking the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, I think that was some pretty cool stuff, and it's really a great project that they're all involved with. So make sure to visit www.norwalkgso.org and facebook.com/norwalkgso for information on their upcoming performance schedule, or if you're interested in becoming a member and getting involved, there's information on that too. So thank you so much to the whole group, but particularly to Sam, Rachel, Nick, and Mike. You're my favorite, Mike. So in the spirit of video game music and podcasting, my recommendation to you this week is going to be a podcast called VG Embassy. That is VGMBASSY. It is a podcast about video game music. The VGEmbassy.com is the website for more information, and you can stream the episodes from there. And if you're interested in video games or video game music, you really should check it out. It's something that was recommended to me by my brother Cameron, who wrote the theme song to Table to Stage. So again, it's the VGMBASSY.com. As always, leave those iTunes ratings and reviews, or email me at tabletostage@gmail.com. Now, make sure to subscribe to the pod if you're not already. You can use any podcast service: iTunes, Podbean, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it. You can find it just about anywhere. And you can follow the pod on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to keep up with my ongoing shenanigans. That's it for now. Until next time, keep creating.